As I understand it, the soul, whom the Lord has been pleased to lead into this mansion, will do best to act as I have said. Let it try, without forcing itself or causing any turmoil, to put a stop to all discursive reasoning. St. Teresa of Avila, The Interior Castle, Fourth Mansions, Chapter 3, Paragraph 7. And we are now in the beginning stages of mystical prayer, where God cooperates with us in our prayer life. Remember in First Mansions 1 through 3, we were reaching out to God under our own efforts. We were in first waters of prayer, dumping that bucket down the well, whittling up the well full of water on our own efforts. It was tedious. Now God's going to jump in and help us out as we begin mystical prayer. Introduction to the Fourth Mansions. We have entered into the prayer stages of the Fourth Mansions, which are the beginning transitionary stages of mystical prayer. Mystical experiences are graces Jesus bestows upon us and prayer originating from Him. St. Teresa also calls this second waters of prayer. This is some pretty exciting stuff here because we're starting to dive in and cover the parameters and I would say protocols, but not methodologies of when mystical prayer happens. It's supernatural. Where Jesus comes to us, He gives us these little gifts and graces to let us know that He's here with us and He pulls us into His presence automatically without us, unbeknownst to us. Like I said before, like here I could be sitting here praying and I'm stilling my mind and be still and know I'm God. We worked all these spiritual exercises and at the end of each episode. Then I go to recollection where I just gaze upon Him and pull Him in. And this is all under my own efforts to pull in and practice the presence with Him. Now, on the flip side, like I said, I've experienced the mystical side of, we're going to talk about the prayer of recollection today, where Jesus comes to me. Like I do a lot of construction work on my old house here. I'll be out working and all of a sudden I could feel the presence of Jesus with me as if I was doing recollection, but I didn't instigate it. Jesus came in and presented His presence with me. So I wasn't thinking about it. The soul wasn't thinking about it, but boom, there's Jesus is, and I feel His presence. I'm practicing His presence there. And that's a mystical state. And we'll see here, when she calls like the prayer of recollection, the prayer of quiet, when she says that, that means a mystical state where Jesus comes to us with these experiences in prayer. Little recap, the Fourth Mansions consist of 3 chapters. We had chapter 1 was consolations. We had chapter 2, spiritual delights. And now we're in chapter 3, prayer of supernatural recollection. Remember, chapter 2, spiritual delights, was the prayer of quiet. Remember the supernatural state where our mind is just, it goes quiet and we're there with the presence of God and we can feel joy, right? We feel like we're very close to Jesus and it's very quiet inside our mind. And she calls it the prayer of quiet. It's also been called the prayer of spiritual delights too, and other translations of her book. And we're going to make note of that here too, because we flip-flop back and forth. Here in chapter 3, we're going to talk about the prayer of supernatural recollection. Like I described earlier, I could be out working on my house. I'm trying to figure out a measurement on a window or something. And as I'm doing so, got the ruler out, marking off places where to cut. And all of a sudden I feel the presence of Jesus with me. He came in on His own. Hey, Mike, what are you doing? We're working on a house here. It's kind of cool. So I feel His presence all of a sudden. Now remember, St. Teresa introduced this topic out of order. She introduced us to the prayer of quiet spiritual delights in chapter 2 of Fourth Mansions, and it's out of order. So the spiritual delights experience or prayer comes in after the prayer of recollection, and we're going to discuss that today. It's going to be a very extensive, very lengthy conversation today, probably the longest one yet. So you may be able to pause this one, come back, or if you're commuting in a car or something, play it on the way to work and the way back. It's because there's so much details here. When I was first learning this, gosh, way back when, I actually found some old emails I dug up because I saved notes on everything. Back in 2014, I was exchanging emails with Connie Rossini of the Contemplative Homeschool. She was only a few people I knew of online back then who was talking about this stuff. And now she's kind of like working with Dave Burke and other people doing stuff, and she's doing classes and training. But I found an old email from her to explain the same thing. Like, this is what recollection is, because I could never figure out what they were talking about. To a non-Catholic, what's recollection? And it was interesting to find out most of the Catholics didn't know what recollection was either, unless you found a Catholic who knew about contemplative prayer. And I spent years scrambling looking for information. What's this recollection? What's it like? And I was overthinking it. My scientific mind was overthinking a super simple process here. And we're going to talk about this here. We already know what the ascetical recollection looks like. Now let's talk about the prayer of recollection. It's just where it's his presence. You practice his presence. His presence comes in. I wish they renamed it something else. I wish they just flat out call it the prayer of his presence. That'd be the easy way of doing it. But I guess some of these theologians had to, they translate how to call it something complex. Maybe they didn't understand themselves. They translated it. Maybe it took more of the contemplative prayer people. But we're talking about the prayer of supernatural, right? Got the quote, supernatural Scott, that come in, and it's Jesus doing it, not us. It's not under our effort. Very interesting, fascinating stuff we're doing here today. So let's go to Dennis Billy Commentary, page 111. In this chapter, Teresa discusses the prayer of recollection. Remember, when she says prayer of, she's talking about mystical prayer now. Fourth mansion's on what's a prayer of something, prayer of union, prayer of this, prayer of that. That is her label for supernatural. So you could call it supernatural recollection, supernatural quiet, supernatural union. That's what she says prayer of his, okay? So it's a new state, a mystical prayer that normally precedes the prayer of quiet is the prayer of recollection. See, I had a hard time getting this nomenclature down. That's what was throwing me for a spin. When she said prayer of, I kept thinking, is this the way we practice prayer? Is this, because it didn't dawn on me from being in the pew of the frozen chosen that prayer is communal. It's bidirectional. So I could pray to Jesus, but when it's a prayer of, according to St. Teresa, Jesus is communing back to me when she labels it prayer of, okay? Let's get that. So it just helps us as we go through the mystical mansions of 4 through 7 now. We talk about this. So the inverted order in her treatment of these two forms of prayer may well be a consequence of her having to stop her writing for a time because of her business and poor health. We discussed this, right? So mental prayer was exploding back in the 1500s because of her and her work and a couple of other contemplatives that she quotes here who also wrote books. So she was like the Apostle Paul at the time back in the 1500s, writing letters to these churches. She established and was a foundationary person for many Carmelite churches at that time for mental prayer. And she was also in poor health. She suffered severely from tinnitus, and she probably also had malaria or something else. We know from her book of life, she nearly died several times. I wonder if she did die one time and God raised her. I'm not sure yet on that one. But they were ready to bury her, and she breathed her life again. So go read the book of life. Fascinating stuff there too. You should be reading that too, in the way of perfection alongside this is homework. So it'll help you come up to speed too of what's going on. Those books now make sense now, as far along as we are in presenting this material here on Tales of Glory. Like I said, I haven't introduced myself yet. I dove right in. I'm too excited, man. I think there's so much to contain. I'm your Reverend Mike. I'm a urban missionary. I go to dark places, to the gates of hell, and pull out people that are stepping into it. I am an exorcist, and I don't like calling myself an exorcist. I'm a spiritual warfare minister, because I don't like labels here, because it's just when God needs me to be a exorcist, he will have me step into that role, and then he'll have me step out of that role. It's not a title. So, but a lot of my information here came from how did I survive so many dark occult battles. As many know my story, there's many times they try to do me in, and they darn near almost succeeded if Jesus didn't intervene. I should not be here right now. And the way I prepared myself is by knowing Jesus and going deep into Jesus. I don't do a lot of protection prayers, and I keep training a lot of people that when you're deep in with Jesus, he protects you a lot of unforeseen stuff. A lot of weapons don't prosper because of him if you're constantly with him. And stay close to him. That's what we're doing right now. Stay close to him, and in your mind, your interior prayer life, go closer and closer to the light where the majesty dwells in the seventh mansion. Just try to stay close to that, and you'll see a lot of stuff thwarted from you that the enemy flings your way. Quick review on recollection. We talked about the first waters, right? That's where we go to the well, and it's tedious, and we bring up our own bucket. So we had acquired recollection in the second mansions, through the third mansions. Remember, St. Teresa told us the people in the second mansion start practicing recollection. They start practicing his presence. That is pulling in the awareness of Jesus Christ into our realm. His kingdom come. His kingdom come on earth as is in heaven. We pull his existence, his presence into where we're at, in our rooms, at work, and we pull it to the point where we constantly feel his presence. That is the goal. And now that we're in mystical prayer, we stepped out of the first waters and we're now in the second waters, which is sometimes called, if you read Thomas Dubé's book, or other times it's called infused, or it's called supernatural, or here St. Teresa calls it prayer of. So the prayer of recollection, or you heard supernatural recollection, or infused recollection, those are all saying the exact same thing, depending on your vocabulary. I'm using prayer of recollection because it's how St. Teresa printed it, but I also like to use supernatural recollection, which means its source is originating from Jesus. And this all begins in the fourth mansion. Some of our early experiences, we start feeling the supernatural recollection. We don't have to recollect ourselves. Like I said, Mike can be out working on his house I'm living in here. And all of a sudden, wow, I'm feeling the presence of Jesus, right? He's inside me. It's just quiet. It's still. That's him. I know he's here. Quick review, acquired recollection from the first waters. We're going back to her book of life. Chapter 12, paragraph 3, it reads, the soul must also pace itself in the presence of Christ and accustom itself to many acts of love directed to his sacred humanity, and remain in his presence continually, and to speak to him, pray to him in necessities, and complain to him of its troubles. Be merry with him in its joys, and yet not forget him because of its joys. See, I like that right there because I always complain to him a lot. So she did that too. I don't complain to him often, but maybe I do often. Well, let's keep going. Although this it may do without set prayers, but rather with words befitting its desires and its needs. So our mind is focusing on it. Here we go. Here's the difference one versus supernatural recollection, second waters, in her book Life, chapter 14, paragraph 2. Now we're talking about supernatural recollection here. Herein the soul begins to be recollected. It is now touching on the supernatural. For it never could by any efforts of its own attain to this. True, it seems at times to have been wearied at the wheel, laboring with the understanding and filling the buckets, right? She's talking about this thing, she's drawing up water. There's her analogy. But in the second degree, the water is higher, and accordingly, the labor is much less than when it was when the water had to be drawn up out of the well by hand. It was tedious. I mean, the water is nearer to it, for grace reveals itself more distinctly to the soul. I have another definition here from Supernatural Recollection, Second Waters, from the Way of Perfection, chapter 28, describes the nature of the Prayer of Recollection. It reads, have nothing to do with that kind of humility, daughters, but speak with him as with a father, a brother, a lord, and a spouse, and sometimes in one way and sometimes another. He will teach you what you must do to please him. Do not be foolish. Ask him to let you speak to him, and as he's your spouse, to treat you as his brides. Remember how important it is for you to understand this truth, that the Lord is within us and that we should be there with him, right? Anything messed up so far here? Remember St. Paul said, right? Jesus dwells in us. And here she says it, that the Lord is within us and that we should be there with him. If one prays this way, the prayer may only be vocal, but the mind will be recollected much sooner. And this is a prayer which brings with it many blessings. It is called recollection because the soul collects together all the faculties and enters within itself to be with its God. Its divine master comes more speedily to teach it and to grant it the prayer of quiet. There's another one, right? The prayer of recollection, the prayer of quiet, than any other way. For hidden there within itself, it can think about the passion and picture the Son and offer him to the Father. Without wearying the mind by going to seek him on Mount Calvary or in the garden or at the column, those who are able to shut themselves up in this way within this little heaven of the soul, wherein dwells the maker of heaven and earth, and who form the habit of looking at nothing and staying in no place which will distract these outward senses, may be sure that they are walking on an excellent road, and will come without fail to drink of the water of the fountain, for they will journey a long way in a short time. They are like one who travels in a ship, and if he has a good little wind, reaches the end of his voyage in a few days, while those who go by land take much longer. So let's dive in here. Fourth Mansions, Chapter 3, The Interior Castle. Fourth Mansions, Chapter 3, Paragraph 1, titled The Prayer of Recollection Compared to the Inhabitants of the Castle. The effects of this kind of prayer are numerous. Some of them I shall explain. First of all, I will say something, though not much, as I have dealt with it elsewhere. And I put if you're watching the video, there's a blue number 1 marker for a place marker on notes. We'll discuss that in a second here. Back to reading. I've dealt with it elsewhere about another kind of prayer, which most invariably begins before this one. It is a form of recollection that also seems to be supernatural, for it does not involve remaining in the dark or closing the eyes, nor is it dependent upon anything exterior. Here she defines it. A person involuntarily closes his eyes and desires solitude. And without the display of any human skill, there seems gradually to be built for him a temple in which he can make the prayer already described. The senses and all external things seem gradually to lose their hold on him, while the soul, on the other hand, regains its lost control. It is sometimes said the soul enters within itself, and sometimes that it rises above itself. I have a number 2 place marker here. We'll discuss these terminology here. These kind of flew by me too because she uses them in the first mansions or second mansions. She talks about the soul enters within itself, and I had a lot of people comment and think, what is she talking about here? How can the soul enter into itself? But I found the source. Got you covered. Back to this. But I cannot explain things in that kind of language, for I have no skill in it. However, I believe you will understand what I am able to tell you, though I may perhaps be intelligible only to myself. She goes, let us suppose that these senses and faculties, the inhabitants, as I have said of this castle, which is the figure that I have taken to explain my meaning, have gone out of the castle. And for days and years have been consorting with strangers to whom all the good things in the castle are abhorrent. Backsliders. Then realizing how much they have lost, they come back to it, though they do not actually re-enter it, because the habits they have formed are hard to conquer. But they are no longer traders, and they now walk about in the vicinity of the castle. So let's unpack paragraph 1. There's quite a bit of things here. So I had note number 1. She explained recollection in other writings. She's referring to Life, chapter 14, The Way of Perfection, chapter 27, chapter, looks like 29, and Relations, chapter 5. 2. Soul entering itself is from the book, The Third Spiritual Alphabet, Book 9 by Francisco de Osuna. This is another interesting book to pick up if you're interested in this stuff. It talks about, 1, the soul entering itself and the soul ascending. And this is the terminology St. Teresa is using that's confusing to us because we are not, 16th century mystics? So we're kind of out of tune with the idioms, you know? She would be too, like, I was totally whacked, or Jesus totally showed up, you know, if we said that in a charismatic church to her. Goes, well, who smacked you in the face? Why were you whacked? You know, or what do you mean Jesus totally showed up? He's omnipresent, you know. You know, it's stuff like that. But ours are goofier. I think we don't want to make fun of her as the soul enters itself. We have more goofier stuff to deal with here in our charismatic church. I digress. Let's move on. So the prayer of recollection, a state of mystical prayer, always precedes the prayer of quiet. I have the quotes. The prayer of means these prayers are supernatural states coming from Jesus. In other words, not under our efforts. Remember, not acquired or ascetical. These are mystical. And prayer of means mystical, supernatural. The source is not us. The source is Jesus. We're communing, right? We always heard that term. We commune with God. And many times I know, well, how do I, how, does he even hear me? Is he listening? We're going to find out. Fourth Mansions, Chapter 3, Paragraph 2, titled, The Shepherd Recalls His Flock into the Castle. The great king who dwells in the mansion within this castle perceives their goodwill and in his great mercy desires to bring them back to him. So, like a good shepherd, with a call so gentle that even they can hardly recognize it, he teaches them to know his voice and not go away and get lost, but return to their mansion. And so powerful is this shepherd's call that they give up things outside the castle that led them astray and once again enter it. So unpacking paragraph 2 real quick, she's talking about some backsliders and people went astray, and they may have reached the third mansions and kind of gave up. I'm not getting the mystical stuff, ain't happening. So they kind of wandered out, resorted to occasions of sin, backslid a little bit, are not doing so well. And Jesus going, wait, you gave up too early. I'm calling you back in here. Come back in here. So he'll gently call his people back in, right? He's a good shepherd, and they still hear his voice. They're going, well, I don't know why I'm being called, but I'm coming back in. Fourth Mansions, Chapter 3, Paragraph 3, titled, This Recollection Supernatural. I do not think I have ever explained this, but before as clearly as here. When we are seeking God within ourselves, where he is found more effectively and more profitably than in the creatures, to quote St. Augustine, who, after having sought him in many places, found him within. It is a great help if God grants us his favor. Do not suppose that the understanding can attain to him merely by trying to think of him as within the soul. Some word right there. Or the imagination by picturing him as is there. This is a good habit, an excellent kind of meditation, where it is founded upon a truth, namely that God is within us. But it's not the kind of prayer that I have in mind, for anyone, with the help of the Lord, you understand, can practice it from himself. What I am describing here is quite different. These people are sometimes in the castle before they have begun to think about God at all. I cannot say where they entered it or how they heard their shepherd's call. It was certainly not with their ears, for outwardly such is not audible. They become markedly conscious that they are gradually retiring within themselves. Anyone who experiences this will discover that what I mean. I cannot explain it better. So God dwells in us. That's what she's talking about here, right? It's a very important concept, especially for spiritual warfare. I know I work with people on both sides of the fence, both Catholic and, Protestant over here, just a simple way of labeling both sides. Many times the Catholics have their relics, which is cool and all, but they can't understand how I walk in and can do an exorcism or do house blessings without a crucifix. And it's happened many times before because it's Jesus within me they don't like. I could bring a relic in or I could bring Jesus. What's interesting is years and years and years ago, I taught a class at, I remember it was Life Changing Reality Church. That was a cool church to go to. I loved it. And there are three young men who are now old. And, this story is so old. These men are now grown. They were teenagers at the time, but they're now grown, have children, have careers. And they wanted to go with me because I said, hey, I got to go bless a house after this class. It's nearby. Do you guys want to go? These guys were awesome. Three young men. Yeah, we want to go. So we all piled in the car and went out to bless his house. And the guy went to meet us. He looks at three men with me, and they're young men. He goes, what are they doing here? And I go, we're here to bless a house. And the guy leans over and goes, you do know a Catholic priest was here 3 weeks ago, and the demon tore off the bedsheet covers and threw them at the priest, and the priest left. I go, no, this is cool. But I looked at the guys, you guys up for this? Like, yeah, let's go do this. We went in. The demons did manifest, but, these young men who had Jesus inside, they were worship leaders, everything else, didn't flinch. And what's amazing is Mateo, I believe it's Mateo, I have to give a shout to you. Mateo is actually the guy that wrote the guitar riff for Tales of Glory for this podcast. So that just gives you some cool stuff. When I reached out and he goes, hey, I want to write the guitar riff for that. I go, dude, I couldn't think of anybody better because you get it. You've been out with some of these adventures with me. So that's the man. So that's the story of Mateo, how he went around and we dealt with Legion in that house. It was funky. We never could finish that because the woman was a psychic and she didn't want to give up her psychic abilities, which were given to her by Legion. And it was a nightmare there. She'd wake up in the middle of the night and her husband's afraid she'd try to kill him, that sort of stuff. But nope, she didn't want to give up her psychic abilities, but that's because her whole will and mind was compromised. And there was some amazing miracles we had there with her. And my wife and I took my wife out the second time after these guys. We got called back several times for emergency to help with her. We said, we're not going to help you anymore unless you accept Jesus. Because it was like Friday night. We're on a date night, right? We get this call, hey, come out and help me out. Dude, it's a date night. So it's like, hey, look, either she comes to Jesus or we're done here. Because it's like several times we were out there and it was an hour and a half drive. So live and learn, guys. Don't drive out to people anymore. Make them come to you. That's one lesson old Mike here learned. Because many times that's part of their spirit of distraction. I'm digressing here. But yeah, anyway, that's why we have the God dwell inside us, because we don't know where to walk in for healing, walk in for, supernatural ministry or something. Keep Jesus inside you, or he's close, you can hear him. So let's unpack this. Unpacking paragraph 3, Dennis Billy, Terra Castle Commentary, page 112. For Teresa, the prayer of recollection is a supernatural gift. One cannot arrive at this level of infused understanding by simply thinking about it. In other words, we can't do it on our own. God, or by exercising the imagination to envision his presence within a soul. It is not the sort of prayer that one can learn and practice for oneself. Right? That would be ascetical. This is mystical. On the contrary, those who arrive at this stage of mystical prayer are given an immediate, infused understanding of God before they even begin to think. They hear God's call and withdraw into themselves to have an entire world open before their eyes. There it is. We are in Fourth Mansions, chapter 3, starting paragraph 4, titled, It Prepares Us for Higher Favors. I think I have read that they are like a hedgehog or tortoise withdrawing into itself, and whoever wrote that must be understood it well. These creatures, however, enter within themselves whenever they like. Wherever he is with us, it is not a question of our will. It happens only when God is pleased to grant us his favor. For my own part, I believe that when his majesty grants it, he does so to people who are already leaving the things of the world. She's talking about detachment. I do not mean that people who are married must actually leave the world. They can do so only in desire. His call to them is a special one and aims at making them intent upon interior things. I believe, however, that if we wish to give his majesty free course, he will grant more than this to those whom he is beginning to call still higher. Anyone who is conscious that this is happening within himself should give God great praise. He will be very right to recognize what a favor it is, and the thanksgiving that he makes for it will prepare him for greater favors, or deeper mansions. One preparation for listening to him, as certain books tell us, is that we should contrive not to use our reasoning powers, but to be intent upon discovering what the Lord is working in the soul. For, if his majesty has not begun to grant us absorption, I cannot understand how we can cease thinking in any way that will not bring us more harm than profit. Although this has been a matter of continual discussion among spiritual persons, for my own part, I confess my lack of humility, but their arguments have never seemed to me good enough to lead me to accept what they say. We're now moving into Fourth Mansions, chapter 3, paragraph 5, titled, The Mind Must Act Until God Calls It to Recollection by Love. One person told me of a certain book by the saintly Fray Peter of Alcantara. For a saint I believe he is, which would certainly have convinced me, for I know how much he knew about such things. But we read it together and found that he says exactly what I say, although not in the same words. It is quite clear from what he says that the love must already be awake. It is possible that I am mistaken, but I base my position on the following reasons. First, in such spiritual activity as this, the person who does most is he who thinks least and desires to do least. What we have to do is to beg like poor and needy persons coming before a great and rich emperor, and then cast down our eyes in humble expectation. When from the secret signs he gives us we seem to realize that he is hearing us, it is well for us to keep silent. since he has permitted us to be near him, and there will be no harm in our striving not to labor with the understanding provided. I mean that we are able to do so. But if we are not quite sure that the king has heard us or see us, we must not stay where we are like ninnies, for there still remains a great deal for the soul to do when it is stilled the understanding. If it did nothing more, it would experience much greater aridity, and the imagination would grow more restless because of the effort caused it by cessation from thought. The Lord wishes us rather to make requests of him and to remember that we are in his presence, for he knows what is fitting for us. Let's unpack paragraph 5. Going back to note 6 we had there. The reference is presumably to the famous Eighth Council of the Treatise of Prayer and Meditation. She's talking about some books and references. I think it was the Saint Alcantara, Francisco Alcantara, is that what it was? And these are good books to pick up. Go Google search these and stuff and find PDFs. I have a ton of PDFs on these books I've been finding left and right now as she drops little breadcrumbs. They're difficult to read because they've been translated over 100 years ago, nothing since, right? We need some modern English translations of these big time. But they're out there. And that's what she was referring to, the Eighth Council, the Treatise of Prayer and Meditation. Fourth Mansions, chapter 3, paragraph 6, titled, The Soul Should Here Abandon Itself into God's Hands. I cannot believe in the efficacy of human activity in matters where His Majesty appears to have set a limit to it and to have been pleased to reserve action to himself. There are many other things in which He has not so reserved it, such as penances, works of charity, and prayers. These, with His aid, we can practice for ourselves, as far as our miserable nature is capable of them. The second reason is that all these interior activities are gentle and peaceful, and to do anything painful brings us harm rather than help. By anything painful, I mean anything that we try to force ourselves to do. It would be painful, for example, to hold our breath. The soul must just leave itself in the hands of God and do what He wills it to do. Completely disregarding its own advantage and resigning itself as much as possibly it can to the will of God. The third reason is that the very effort that the soul makes in order to cease from thought will perhaps awaken thought and cause it to think a great deal. The fourth reason is that the most important and pleasing thing in God's eyes is our remembering His honor and glory and forgetting ourselves and our own profit and ease and pleasure. Right? There she goes. Humility, humility, humility. Remember to approach Him and beg Him for this, and then put your eyes down, humble. Humility, humility. There she is. She's tracking it all through, guys. And how can a person be forgetful of himself when he is taking such great care about his actions that he dare not even stir or allow his understanding desires to stir? Even for the purpose of desiring the great glory of God or of rejoicing in the glory which is His? When His Majesty wishes the working of the understanding to cease, He employs it in another manner, and illumines the soul's knowledge to so much higher degree that any way we can ourselves attain that, He leads into a state of absorption in which, without knowing how, it is much better instructed that it could ever be as a result of its own efforts, which would only spoil everything. God gave us our faculties to work with, and everything will have its due reward. There is no reason, then, for trying to cast a spell over them. They must be allowed to perform their office until God gives them a better one. Let's unpack paragraph 6. We came another term, absorption in God. We see that quite frequently, and she speaks about this. What on earth is absorption? So I'm going to Thomas Dubé's book, Fire Within. It's this guy right here. Fire Within, Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross, and the Gospel and Prayer. St. Ignatius Press. This one's off my Kindle. Absorption in God, one might summarize these biblical descriptions of advanced prayer by considering them as complementary aspects of an immersion in God, an absorption in the Beloved. For the saint of the old dispensation as for the saint of the new, the heart of the human enterprise is nothing other than being filled with the divine, a being transformed into God Himself, A participation in divine nature. In Dubé states, Mary is portrayed by Luke as a woman whose primary and typical occupation is pondering the word in her heart. For Jesus, the Father is like a powerful magnet to which he is continually drawn, and so he habitually goes off for long periods of protracted absorption in the Father, even throughout whole nights. Right? So we remember that when Jesus goes off and just prays to his Father in lengthy times of night, like late in the morning and stuff. That's an absorption. He's fully drawn in, he's fully attentive to him. He's in absorption in prayer with nothing but his Father. Fourth Mansions, chapter 3, paragraph 7, titled The Prayer of Recollection and Distractions in Prayer. As I understand it, the soul whom the Lord has been pleased to lead into this mansion will do best to act as I have said. Let it try, without forcing itself or causing any turmoil, to put a stop to all discursive reasoning. We opened with this one, the Tales of Glory at this time. Yet not to suspend the understanding, nor to cease from all thought, though it is well for it to remember that it is in God's presence and who this God is. If feeling this should lead into a state of absorption, well and good. But it should not try to understand what this state is, because that is a gift bestowed upon the will. The will, then, should be left to enjoy it, and should not labor except for uttering a few loving words. For although in such a case one may not be striving to cease from thought, such cessation often comes, though for a very short time. I have explained elsewhere the reason why this occurs in this kind of prayer. I'm referring to the kind that I began to explain in this mansion. With it, I have included this prayer of recollection that ought to have been described first, for it comes far below the consolations of God already mentioned, and is indeed the first step toward attaining them. So it's one of the first experiences in the fourth mansions in the transitioning into mystical prayer, she's saying. For in the prayer of recollection, it is unnecessary to abandon meditation in the activities of the understanding, when instead of coming through conduits, the water springs directly from its source. She's explaining how the second waters come into effect here. The understanding checks its activity, or rather the activity is checked for it when it finds it cannot understand what it desires. And thus it roams about all over the place like a demented creature and can settle down to do nothing. The will is fixed so firmly upon its God that its disturbed condition of the understanding causes it great distress. But it must not take any notice of this, or if it does so, it will lose a great part of what it's enjoying. It must forget about it and abandon itself into the arms of love, and His Majesty will teach it what to do next. Almost its whole work is to realize its unworthiness to receive such great good and to occupy itself in thanksgiving. Like, just embrace it. Modern English, just don't fight it, just embrace it. So unpacking paragraph 7. In footnote 8, she was mentioning a prayer she described earlier in this mansion. And she's referring back to her description in the Way of Perfection, chapter 31, the prayer of quiet. Now, daughters, I still want to describe this prayer of quiet to you. In the way I have heard it talked about, and as the Lord has been pleased to teach it to me, perhaps in order that I might describe it to you, it is in this kind of prayer as I have said. That the Lord seems to me to begin to show us that He is hearing our petition. He begins to give us kingdom on earth so that we may truly praise Him and hallow His name and strive to make others do so likewise. This is a supernatural state. However hard we try, we cannot reach it for ourselves. For it is a state in which the soul enters into peace, or rather in which the Lord gives it peace through His presence. Got that? It's a state of His presence coming in. We're feeling total peace when His presence comes. Let's continue. As He did to that just man Simeon, in this state all the faculties are stilled. The soul, in a way, has nothing to do with the outward senses, realizes that it is now very close to its God, and that if it were but a little closer, it would become one with Him through union. So we're talking about something that's possibly happening in fifth mansions or the sixth mansions where there's a full union. So we get so close to him. Remember, it's union of wills, transformation from glory to glory. We're close to a full union, but not quite there yet. So that's what she's saying. If it were but a little closer, it would become one with him through union. So the prayer of quiet's like a semi-close union, but not quite union. Fourth Mansions, Chapter 3, Paragraph 8, titled Liberty of Spirit Gained by Consolations. In order to discuss the prayer of recollection, I have passed over the effects or signs to be observed in souls to whom this prayer, I put in blue quotes there, of quiet, she's talking about whom this prayer of quiet is granted by God our Lord. It is clear that dilation or enlargement of the soul takes place. Remember, we're expanding our capacity now to have more of Jesus. So we're having a dilation enlargement. Let's return back to this. As if the water proceeding from the spring has no means of running away, but the fountain had a device ensuring that the more freely the water flowed, larger became the basin. So it is in this kind of prayer, and God works many more wonders in the soul, thus fighting and gradually disposing it to retain all that he gives it. So this gentle movement and this interior dilation cause the soul to be less constrained in matters relating to the service of God than when it was before, and give it much more freedom. It is not oppressed, for example, by the fear of hell, for though it desires more than ever not to offend God, of whom, however, it has lost all servile fear, it has firm confidence that it is destined to have fruition of him. A person who used to be afraid of doing penance lest should he ruin his health now believes that in God he can do everything. In God I can do everything, right? She's quoting scripture again. It has more desire to do such things than he had previously. The fear of trials that he was wont to have is now largely assuaged because he has more lively faith, and he realizes that if he endures these trials for God's sake, his majesty will give him grace to bear them patiently. Remember, I always joke, like, if you want to get something, here comes a trial. That's kind of the experience in the fourth mansions on. Actually, it was in the second through third mansions too. We just didn't totally realize it. As we prayed for stuff, these trials came. But now we don't fear trials. And as she said back in, was the fourth mansions chapter 2, that God may have allowed demonic activity because he knows the demons won't thwart us or hurt us. But even so, if we have to deal with them, it increases our capacity for Jesus. So interesting stuff there. So beware of trials. Sometimes Jesus allowed demons to come and deal with stuff on us. But now we're deeper in the mansions and closer to him, like, meh, right? The trial won't be fun, especially with demons involved, but it's like, meh, we'll get through it. And sometimes even to desire them, because he also cherishes a great desire to do something for God. The better he gets to know the greatness of God, the better he comes to realize the misery of his own condition. Having now tasted the consolations of God, he sees that earthly things are mere refuse. So, little by little, he withdraws them, and in this way becomes more and more his own master. In short, he finds himself strengthened in all the virtues and will infallibly continue to increase in them unless he turns back and commits offenses against God when that happens. Don't backslide. Let's continue. Everything is lost, however far a man may have climbed toward the crest of the mountain. So let's unpack paragraph 8. What's happening here? And I'm quoting from the Interior Castle Study Edition, the Carmelite, the OCD version. After discussing at some length the prayer of recollection, Teresa returns to the topic of effects or signs in a soul to whom God gives the prayer of spiritual delight or quiet. She mentioned earlier that one effect is expansion or dilation of the soul. She returns to the fountain metaphor, but with a difference. Okay, so we're talking about dilation again, right? Remember we talked about how the heart grows. What was that Psalm 119 she was quoting? The heart grows. When the heart grows, Jesus will come in and increase our heart, or our capacity, our spiritual capacity, to receive more of him and more graces from him. But he has to do it, right? This is how we're building a relationship. We're growing deeper in love with him. And as we do so, he's increasing our capacity to take more of him. That's what she's talking about. A dilation of the soul. Now she asks us to imagine a fountain constructed of material that can be expanded so that more of the water flows. The larger the water trough becomes. increased our capacity. There it is. Continue what they say in the OCD. She says that in the prayer of delight, which is the prayer of quiet, God prepares a soul so it can keep everything within itself. The soul has more freedom. The soul is no longer constrained by fear of hell, although it has even greater fear of offending God. The soul is left with great confidence that it will enjoy the Lord. Those who've experienced the prayer of spiritual delight, quiet, right, have less fear of penance and trials, right? Because when we go through a trial, we're getting junk cleaned out of us. That's either spiritual, or worldly attachments or fears or something like that, or bad behaviors. And as those get flushed out of us and cleaned out of us, and the demonic attachments, we have greater capacity for Jesus. Sometimes they even desire suffering in order to do something for God. Worldly delights have no attraction, and there is no improvement in all the virtues. If the soul does not turn back, it will continue to grow. Right? So no matter how rough it gets, no matter how bad trials get, remember? Third mansions, we had some nasty trials. We had some bad stuff to clean us up, because that was one of the mansions that cleaned us up to step into the fourth mansions. And we could be in the sixth mansions, be tossed back to the third mansions to have nasty trials to clean us up, to prepare us for deeper graces in the sixth and seventh mansions, or the fifth mansions. Who knows? Remember, it flip-flops. It can flip-flop. Let's go back to this. Back to the OCD. She clarifies that these effects are not the result of only one or two instances of prayer of delight, quiet. The soul must persevere in receiving and practicing these good effects, for in this perseverance lies all our good. Fourth Mansions, Chapter 3, Paragraph 9, titled, The Soul Must Be Watchful. It must not be understood, however, that all these things that take place because once or twice God has granted a soul his favor. It must continue receiving them, for it is from their continuance that all our good proceeds. There is one earnest warning that I must give those who find themselves in a state, namely, that they exert the very greatest care to keep themselves from occasions of offending God. Whereas yet the soul is not even weaned, but is like a child beginning to suck the breast. If it be taken from its mother, what can it be expected to do but die? That, I am very much afraid, will be the lot of anyone to whom God has granted this favor if he gives up prayer, unless he does so for some very exceptional reason, or unless he returns to it quickly. He will go from bad to worse. Fourth Mansions, Chapter 3, Paragraph 10. The devil specially tempts such souls. I am aware how much ground there is for fear about this, and I have been very much grieved by certain people I know, in whom I have seen what I am describing. They have left him who, in his great love, was yearning to give himself to them as a friend, and to prove his friendship by his works. I earnestly warn such people not to enter upon occasions of sin, because the devil sets much more store by one soul in the state than by a great number of souls to whom the Lord does not grant these favors. For those in this state attract others, and so they can do the devil great harm and may well bring great advantage to the church of God. He may see nothing else in them except that this majesty is showing them special love. But this is quite sufficient to make him to do his utmost to bring about their perdition. The conflict, then, is sterner for such souls than for others, and if they are lost, their fate is less remedial. Oof. Back to and most of you know I have dyslexia, so I'm reading lots of paragraphs. There's a lot of cuts and edits in here. It's like, oh my gosh, tongue twisters, or the eyes and the tongue coordination's not quite there yet. You probably catch it as I read, though. But it is what it is, man. You can't, Here we go. Let's unpack paragraph 10. The Carmelite Reformation. Fourth Mansions, Chapter 3, Paragraph 11. False trances and raptures. You, sisters, so far as we know, are free from these perils. May God free you from the pride and vainglory, and grant the devil may not counterfeit these favors. Such counterfeits, however, will be recognizable because they will not produce these effects, but quite contrary ones. There is one peril of which I want to warn you, though I have spoken of it elsewhere. I have seen persons given to prayer fall into it, and especially women, as we are far weaker than men. The times and the age back then, wow. Let's continue. We run more risk of what I'm going to describe. It is this. Some women, because of prayers, vigils, and severe penances, and also for other reasons, have poor health. When they experience any spiritual consolation, therefore, their physical nature is too much for them. For other reasons, having poor health, when they experience any spiritual consolations, therefore, their physical nature is too much for them, and as soon as they feel any interior joy, there comes over them a physical weakness and a languor. And they fall into a sleep, and I'm putting in quotes here, trance, which they call spiritual, and which is a little more marked than the condition that has been described. Thinking the one state to be the same as the other, they abandon themselves to this absorption. And the more they relax, the more complete becomes this absorption because their physical nature continues to grow weaker. So they get into their heads that they are abormentimo, it's either Spanish or Latin, or rapture. They think that their souls are getting lifted up, right? When we're talking about the spiritual rapture it's not like rapture we're talking about, well, similar, but not like we talk about here in Revelation. But we'll talk about this in Six Mansions, where the Holy Spirit will pick you up and do stuff. It's called a rapturing, or pick up your soul. Let's continue. But I call it abomentio, or foolishness, where they are doing nothing but wasting their time at it and ruining their health, doing these trances. Oh my goodness. Yeah, right? So she had charismatic church issues back there, and the mystical people too. You go smack them in the face. You're in a trance. You're not in the prayer of quiet. Wake it up. Wake it up. Snap out of it. Let me see if I'm at the end here first. Yeah, I am. Before I jump into this, before I unpack paragraph 11, there is something out there right now. It's total rubbish called the New Mystics, and they teach going to trances. They totally didn't pick up at all what Teresa is talking about. They made up their own thing, and it's the dark end. It's the dark side, the dark end of the charismatic church end. Crowder, whoever does this thing. Go look up New Mystics, but don't participate in it. Do not, and repent for participating in it, because when you go into a trance, it's more demonic. When we go into recollection, it's because, like I said, we're just doing stuff, and God's omnipresent, and Jesus wants to check in on us. Hey, how you doing? I'm in the neighborhood. He's omnipresent. I'm in the neighborhood. I'm going to check in on Mike. I'm going to check in on you. What's going on here? And that's a spiritual recollection, or not any weird trance when this happens. Just you feel his presence. So let's unpack paragraph 11. The Dennis Billy commentary, page 112. Teresa concludes this chapter with some warnings to her Carmelite sisters about the dangers of false mysticism. Oh, there it is right there. She tells them to be careful mistaking true mystical experiences from the consequences of the weak and languid bodily disposition arising from poor health and a life of strict ascetical prayers. If the experience truly comes from God, there will be no languor in the soul, but only the joy of finding itself near God. Got it? You're experiencing the joy of God. God brings it. Let's continue. They should be completely honest to the superiors about such matters and follow their prescriptions closely. So what she's saying here is, again, I'm beaten up because I'm experiencing a lot of this stuff right now. Not just the charismatic church, but it's spilling over from it. We're having our false mystical experiences. We're having our false prophetic experiences, and we're running with them, and people are embracing them. And it's like educating ourselves in calculus with no teacher. Some people will get it, and some people will make up their own stuff going, that's not right. How'd you arrive at that? I totally got it, and God told me how to do it. If there's other people, put time in the calculus, they figured it out, did all examples, braille things, and they got something different. Like, that's not right. So does that make sense? We can't teach ourselves this. It has to come from Jesus. And like she said before, some souls will get anxious and backslide. And if you're in doing prophetic ministry, you're not hearing from God properly, you're in that backsliding state she's talking about. And you get up, I have a word, because you just want to get up in front of the podium and tell people that you can hear from God. That's soulish. It could be demonic too, but I think more stuff I've seen here has been soulish, people trying to promote themselves. I've seen it in deliverance ministry where it's like, it's bad. I mean, it's something's got to be done. I think we get more people who truly understand spiritual direction. That's a problem. Finding real people like she's talking about, a spiritual director is hard to find. If I get them in on counseling, I'll tell them, no, that's not true. That's not true. It's getting harder and harder because more people I've been interfacing with have been believing this stuff. It's just, oh my gosh, you know? And when the true prophet comes, you'll see it or you feel it. And I'm not big on with the Apostolic Council of Prophetic Elders. I call them the Apostolic Council of Prophetic Karens. It's just their stuff is so messed up right now, especially Apostolic Reform. There's two spiritual mystical people, and there's so many fake it till you make it. So that's what she's harping on too. This has been happening since the 1600s or before. She knows too. This is cool. Fourth Mansions, Chapter 3, Paragraph 12. How to treat those deluded in this way. One person was in a state for 8 hours. She was not unconscious, nor was she conscious of anything concerning God. She was cured by being told to take more food and sleep and do less penance. She is talking in the third person here, and she's usually confessing about herself. One person was in a state, she goes, a little side note here. She's going, it was me. I was in a state. That's how I know about this. So she got correction and she moved on. That's why I want to receive correction. But in church right now, we don't seem to want to receive correction because it will tarnish our notoriety. But you got to receive correction. So she was cured by being told to take more food and sleep and do less penance. And here we tell these people, you're not going to spend any time on the pulpit. Sorry, we shouldn't allow it. Let's continue. For though she had misled both her confessor and other people and quite involuntarily deceived herself, there was one person who understood her. Look at that. Look at that. We were just talking about this, right? So she was the charismatic at heart here, right? That's kind of like the way I'm directing. Mike, you're being hard on charismatics. And I think St. Teresa was a charismatic, but you got to dial it in. There's protocols. There's things we got to do. Humility. Humility is the major protocol. It's right there. And check with others. I have people I check with and I have supernatural experiences. Like I said, my friends from the shift. I know where they're walking at. I know who they are. So I'll share stuff with them. In fact, there's more stuff. We're going to go meet face to face here in probably February and probably do podcasts, do other stuff with them. And I'm going to download some stuff right to them too. I think it'd be a cool night because I don't know anybody else I can share it with. So I'll talk with them and get some spiritual direction and, and just say, yeah. So that's where we do it. Find people you trust and find people who aren't fake it till you make it. If they have a lot of people around them, swarming around them, oh, tell me this, tell me that. Oh, great one. You're around the wrong person. Let's continue. I believe the devil will go to any pains to gain such people as that, and he was beginning to make good progress with this one, with her. It must be understood that although when this state is something that really comes from God, there may be languor, both interior and exterior. There will be none in the soul, which when it finds itself near God is moved with great joy. The experience does not last long, but only for a while. Right? We can't hold on to the spark. We can't make the spark go longer, and we can't recreate the spark she's talking about here. The experience does not last long. Although the soul may become absorbed again, yet this kind of prayer, as I have said, except in cases of physical weakness, does not go as far as to overcome the body or produce in it any exterior sensation. Be advised then, if you experience anything of this kind, tell your superior and relax as much as you can. The superior should give such persons fewer hours of prayer, very few indeed, and should see that they sleep and eat well. Until their physical strength, if it has become exhausted, comes back again. If their constitution is so weak that this does not suffice, they can be certain that God is not calling them to anything beyond the active life. God's considerate about your health. He's not being mean. He wants you to be well before he works more with you. So catch the clue. There is room in convents for people of all kinds. Let anyone of this type then be kept busy with duties, and let care be taken that is not left alone very much, or her health will be completely ruined. This sort of life will be a great mortification to her, but it is here that the Lord wishes to test her love for him by seeing how she bears his absence. And after a while, he may well be pleased to restore her strength. If he is not, her vocal prayer and her obedience will bring her as much benefit and merit as she would have attained in any other way, and perhaps more. In other words, it's not our actions that, oh, I did this, this, and this that get you back to him. She fell back because Jesus wanted her to, and she stayed to vocal prayer and some obedience. And God honored and merited her obedience for recognizing what he wanted her to do. And will bring her as much benefit and merit as she would have obtained in other ways, and perhaps more. Humility and obedience, that's what he wants. Fourth Mansions, chapter 3, paragraph 13. Risks of delusion in this mansion. There may also be some that are so weak in intellect and imagination, I have known such, that they believe they actually see all they imagine. Yep. Oh my gosh. She is speaking to Mike 400 years ago, or back, right? I'm nodding right here. In deliverance ministry, I'm dealing with that. I have known such that they believe they actually see all they imagine. That is the charismatic church right there. They don't know what the difference between soulish and supernatural. 90% of them who are seeing angels aren't seeing angels. It's mainly because God's not wanting to show them to them. It's because they're faking it till they make it, and they're living a lie. So they're living this delusional, Truman Show of their own, so to speak. This is highly dangerous, so perhaps we shall treat of it later, but no more shall be said here, for I have written at great length of this mansion, as it is the one that the greatest number of souls enter. As a natural is united with the supernatural in it, it is here the devil can do most harm, for in the mansions of which I have yet not spoken, the Lord gives him fewer opportunities. Maybe he be forever praised. Amen. Spiritual exercises, gentle transitions into mystical prayer. This episode was so long, I didn't want to cheat you guys out of a spiritual exercise, but I don't have the room for it, mainly because the gigabyte storage when I upload. Some of the files I know are limited in size, and I know I'm reaching it or pretty darn close to it. So I'm going to give you a homework assignment, and I'm not cheating on you guys, but I want you guys to try this on your own now, because usually when I give you an exercise, spiritual exercise, this is like 10 to 15 minutes, and it doesn't allow you guys to go longer or explore more because I cut you off in the episode. So here, I'm going to give you guys something to try on your own. It's very much like what we've been doing. We're going to contemplate the preeminence of Jesus Christ. And again, your homework assignment is to still your mind, Psalm 46:10, still your faculties, recollection, gaze upon him, draw him in, draw in his presence. And then read from Colossians chapter 1, verses 16 through 20, which talk about the preeminence of Jesus Christ and who he is. Yep, that's what I got for you guys. Conclusion, Fourth Mansions chapter 3. Gentle transitions into mystical prayer. Prayer of Recollection, which comes first, from Fourth Mansions chapter 3. And then it transitions into the prayer of quiet, which is Fourth Mansions chapter 2. And she also spoke here of false mysticism. Like I said, it's running rampant right now in our churches. Big time. Big time in our churches. And it's something, even deliverance ministry, I'm running into a few souls who are so big on lying about their ministry and what they're doing that it's actually derailing and causing problems in churches I'm working with. And I'm having to speak on stuff about it because people bring it in as a truth. I mean, yeah, I don't even know where to go with this one, but it's a huge problem right now, and we need to have people who are mature, and prophetic, and stuff, and start squashing this stuff, start shutting it down. It's getting to be where people are looking for notoriety. It's all it's about right now in the society, where they want to be influencers, and it's destructive to the faith. And it's destructive to young people coming in, or new converts, or discipleship. It's destructive there. And I see it quite a bit. And it's been destructive too in deliverance ministry, where people walked in thinking they knew everything and they were prophetic. And I had pastors that people working with something, they shut something down. And I think they sucked the person out to go work with them because they thought we weren't doing stuff right. Although I had 20 years of experience, and I know the pastor I was working with probably had like 15, 20 years experience in deliverance too, but this person thought they knew better. And we keep bumping into their deliverance work. And it's annoying, but it's happening. And I'm going to start picking out a few Tales of Glory later on to address this subject in detail and start exposing what this is. But right now, it's just, this is the challenges right now. If we want to be mystical or do we want to be charismatic, I think we need to go down the mystical avenue, and we need to start having more mature people in the churches who understand prayer, who've truly had mystical experiences and not lie about them. Start spiritual guidance, spiritual formation with these people. Spiritual direction is what I'm looking for. I do it a lot in counseling, and I've actually helped out a lot of young prophetic ministers who got derailed and beat up by the fake it till you make it, and some people who are high up in church. I mean, I had one SRA person I butted heads with a long time ago in my career. I think the story showed up in a Advanced Field Guide Spiritual Warfare about the dangers of prophetic ministry, working with SRA. And this person was just screaming on the phone. And it turns out when I moved to another county, there was a charismatic church out here I was looking into going into. And I was watching online to see if I like it. And sure enough, their mother, prophetic mother, they brought up, who they know thinks she knows everything, does great stuff. She was an SRA person. And she infiltrated. And all, like I said, I'm not going to go into details here. I don't know. Oh, dear God, they let her in too. So we got to have, from the leadership level, the ability to discern danger that will destroy the flock. All right, I digressed, didn't I? But that's why this stuff's important, guys. We have to understand the mystical side, because the enemy surely does, and he'll send the enemy right into our church. The enemy will send his little drones right in. Next time, Fifth Mansions, Chapter 1. Woohoo! I think we're going to jump into the Prayer of Union. I don't know what's in there yet, but yeah, that's 4 chapters. Here we go. Yep, lock and load, baby. But we're in the fourth mansion's mystical, right? So who the heck's this guy? I'm your host, Michael Norton, the M16 Bishop. I hope you find this material informative. M16 Ministries' broadcasting mission is to bring material and content on the glory of God, the miraculous of the Great Commission, spiritual formation, and spiritual warfare to various internet media sources. So I truly appreciate you guys for listening, especially listening this long. I get a lot of people, I watch the YouTube, right? The metrics, and they drop off after like, oh my God, this guy's talking for longer than 10 minutes. Well, that's fine if that's where we're at, but my intent isn't to make 10-minute productions. So it's to get information out to people that need it, and the people who need it are reaching it. And it's like, I don't care if 4 people listen to it all the way through. I'm not here for being an influencer. I'm disseminating this information as I produce it, and it's amazing the souls who benefited from this. I don't need 100,000 likes. I don't need 500,000 subscribers. If I had like 4 souls that benefited from this today, it was well worth my time putting information together. So if you want to bless this ministry, and we're getting up close, I don't know if I'll publish before the end of the year, but we could sure use a blessing, because like I said, I got an outreach coming up here with Cindy McGill, and we're going into Vegas. We're going, like I said, to the gates of hell to pull people out of it. Somebody's got to do it, right? So you can bless this ministry by going to PayPal and submitting your blessing to m16ministries@gmail.com. I strongly recommend using the PayPal button off of A Field Guide to Spiritual Warfare.blogspot.com. I believe this will be episode 132 on A Field Guide to Spiritual Warfare.blogspot.com, and we'll be on Spotify, YouTube, Rumble, Apple Podcasts, all the above. Wherever you can find a podcast, we'll be there. We're heard around the world, man. That's what I think's so cool. So that's it, folks. We're at the end of 2024. Oh my gosh, hope you guys had a great Christmas. Had some cool ones here too. So I want you to be a blessing, make good choices. This is the M16 Bishop, the M16 HQ at the latter end of 2024, Sunday, December 29th. Amen.